If you are lucky enough to be a survivor of an apocalypse, whether it's zombies or Armageddon, you won't last long if you don't know how to use that strange food your prepper neighbor stored away in his cellar. According to the author of Prophetic Statements on Food Storage, dietitians have cited that there are 5 main ingredients that a person needs to sustain life. They're honey or sugar, preferably honey because it has more life-sustaining properties in it than sugar, salt, milk, vitamin C, and wheat, or another good grain. The first few are very basic. Most people understand honey and sugar, salt and milk. Vitamin C can be difficult to store because of its short lifespan. However, if you understand how to use the grain that has been stored away, you'll have a better chance of living to see a post-apocalyptic community rebuilt. In this video, you'll learn 4 lessons on grains: types of grains, whole grains, soaking and sprouting grains, and cold cereal grains. The very basic understanding that most people have of grain is that it is wheat that is turned into flour and then used to make bread. This is true. Wheat is a grain and when ground is used as flour for baking and cooking. There are also 2 other words in relation to wheat that many people have learned to associate but may not completely understand: gluten and whole wheat. If the package on the shelf says gluten-free, it's supposed to be better for us. And then, of course, whole wheat is supposed to be a healthier choice too. There are actually many different types of grains. So this brings us to lesson number 1, types of grains. You've got things like spelt, kamut, barley, millet, oat groats, quinoa, and rye, along with many others. Wheat is simply just the most well-known. Wheat is also the one that contains the most gluten. Why do you need to know what gluten is? If you suddenly have to rely on a food storage that is filled with wheat, you will definitely die from gluten intolerance. Gluten, simply put, is what gives bread the pretty, fluffy look, but it is very difficult for our bodies to digest. According to the author of Recovering Lost Traditions by Returning to Whole Grains, it is estimated that over 60% of the population has some degree of gluten intolerance. Gluten intolerance stems from consuming flour in its dry or refined form. Because the flour lacks all the components to be digested well and eliminate itself, the body starts having immune reactions to it. The reason that celiac disease or gluten intolerance has become more prevalent in recent times, but wheat has been around for nearly forever, is that our modern wheat has actually been altered to have more gluten in it so that we can have more attractive bread. I guess we didn't know how bad gluten was for our bodies when we decided to play with nature, but lucky for us, we can learn how to use wheat without dying from gluten intolerance. Lesson number 2, the whole grain. Before we can learn how to eat wheat without dying, we need to understand grain a little more. Whole wheat is an intact kernel of wheat, meaning that in order to be complete and whole, all 3 parts of a grain have to be together: the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. The bran is the outer layer of the grain and is the fiber that helps to digest the other 2 parts. The germ is where all the nutrients are contained. The endosperm is the starch and the gluten. Through our current popular refining process, the bran and the germ have been removed, and what is left is the bag of fortified white flour that we purchase off the supermarket shelf. Fortified means synthetic nutrients, as opposed to the natural nutrients that were contained in the germ that have been removed for shelf life purposes. When a grain is allowed to stay intact, it becomes an amazing health benefit and earns its place on the list of survival foods. Many people are scared off by grains initially because they associate it with carbohydrates. And even if they are unsure what a carbohydrate is, they know that it's something most people cut back on when dieting. Whole grains have the same or even more disease-fighting compounds, though, than fruits and vegetables. Vitamin B, which is lost in the refining process, is essential to normal growth and maintenance of the body. Phytoestrogens, also found in whole grains, help ease the strain on our bodies in making all of the needed hormones. When we are lacking in these phytoestrogens, problems begin to arise in estrogen-related processes, like an increase in menopausal symptoms, difficult menstruation, and inefficient childbirth. According to our author on Recovering Lost Traditions by Returning to Whole Grains, a diet rich in plant hormones will lift the body's burden of producing only its hormones, which can greatly strain and wear out the body. Our bodies were designed to primarily use plant hormones and produce only a minimal supply of our own hormones when needed. Now that we understand grain importance and all of the good things in it, how do we neutralize the bad stuff? It would be an awful shame to die from our food after we were able to miraculously ward off a zombie invasion. So, lesson number 3, soaking and sprouting grains. Soak your grains for a minimum of 7 hours and then sprout them for an additional 8 to 12 hours. This process is not a new idea. It was actually an ancient practice that many people still do today. Soaking and sprouting grains allows grains to neutralize enzyme inhibitors. All grains contain phytic acid, an organic acid in which phosphorus is bound in the outer layer or bran. Untreated phytic acid can combine with calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc in the intestinal tract and block absorption. This is why a sudden change in a food storage diet consisting of a year's supply of wheat could potentially kill a person. A diet high in unfermented whole grains may lead to serious mineral deficiencies and bone loss. Soaking allows these enzymes, lactobacilli, and other helpful organisms to break down and neutralize phytic acid. Soaking your grains not only neutralizes the enzyme inhibitors, but encourages the production of numerous beneficial enzymes. The action of these enzymes also increases the amounts of many vitamins, especially B vitamins. Dry grain contains no vitamin C, but sprouted grain does. Having grain on the list of survival foods actually covers the need of having the essential vitamin C that is needed for survival. 2 problems solved with 1 solution. Soaking and sprouting grain solves the problem of trying to store the short-shelved life vitamin C. The sprouting process not only pre-digests proteins, making it easier for our bodies to eat, but sprouting also converts the proteins into complete proteins, meaning that it contains all the essential amino acids in the correct quantity and ratio needed for the human body. Studies have shown that the proteins in grains, especially high gluten grains like wheat, strain the whole digestive system. When this system is overworked and abused, problems arise like celiac disease, allergies, candida sclerosis, mental illness, and chronic indigestion. Soaking grain actually breaks down gluten and other proteins that are hard on our bodies into simpler components that are easier for our bodies to absorb. Soaking and sprouting grain is easily done. I would even argue that a mindless brain-eating zombie might be able to accomplish the task. All you need is a glass container, your grains, and some water. You can even use a mason jar. Fill the jar or bowl halfway with your grains and then fill the jar 3/4 of the way with water. Cover the jar loosely with a towel and let it sit for at least 7 hours. The process takes time, but not your time. Oftentimes, you can just let the grain soak overnight while you sleep. After it's finished soaking, drain the water and let the grain sit for another 8 hours. The grain is then ready for eating. If you want to grind the grain into flour, you need to add one last step. The grain needs to dry out before it can be ground. This can be done either in a dehydrator, in an oven, or just laid out on a cookie sheet in the dry, warm outdoor air. The final lesson on grains is in regards to cold cereal. You may not have any cereal to eat in a post-apocalyptic world, but this lesson may help you survive at least to the apocalypse. According to the author of Nourishing Traditions, whole grains that have been processed by high heat and pressure to produce puffed wheat, oats, and rice are actually quite toxic and have caused rapid death in test animals. The breakfast cereals that have been slurried and extruded at high temperatures and pressures to make little flakes and shapes should be avoided. Studies show that these extruded whole grain preparations can have even more adverse effects on the blood sugar than refined sugar and white flour. According to a research study done at Ann Arbor University, 18 rats were divided into 3 groups. One group received cornflakes and water, a second group was given the cardboard box that the cornflakes came in, and some water, and the control group received rat chow and water. The rats in the control group remained in good health throughout the experiment. The rats receiving the box became lethargic and eventually died of malnutrition. However, the rats receiving cornflakes and water died before the rats who were given the box. The last cornflake rat died on the day the first box rat died. Before death, the cornflake rats developed schizophrenic behavior, threw fits, bit each other, and finally went into convulsions. Autopsy revealed dysfunction of the pancreas, liver and kidneys, and degeneration of the nerves in the spine. All signs of insulin shock. The startling conclusion of the study is there is more nourishment in the box that the cold cereals come in than the cereals themselves. Clearly, if we have an apocalypse that results from zombies, I might assume the zombies were created from a cold breakfast cereal experiment. Or if not, maybe we could kill the zombies off by feeding them cold cereal. Learning about the benefits of whole grains and the health disadvantages of tampered grains does not change a person's kitchen habits overnight. Oddly enough, my family still has cold cereal boxes on our pantry shelf. However, Knowledge is power, and if you know how to make grain healthy enough to belong on the survival foods list, then you are one step ahead of the rest. You may have a better chance of surviving a post-apocalyptic society. Be sure to review the course Canvas module for further information and to take your unit quiz.